If I told you the quietest moment of my life was the day my marriage ended, would you believe me? No shouting, no slam doors, just a silence so precise it felt like someone had drawn a clean line straight through the center of my world. I didn't plan to leave, not at first. I didn't wake up dreaming of studio apartments or metal keys stamped with unfamiliar numbers. But life has a way of showing you, slowly, quietly, when you've reached the end of pretending. And for me, the truth arrived in small pieces. The late nights, the half-answers, the hollow apologies that sounded more like habits than remorse. So I found a place. A simple studio with white walls, a single lamp, and a window that caught morning light in a way that felt almost merciful. I didn't tell anyone, not because I wanted to hide, but because I needed one corner of the world that belonged entirely to me. A place where the quiet didn't accuse me. A place where I could hear my own thoughts again. And when he showed up at my door with a suitcase and a shaky explanation, I realized something unexpected. Endings aren't always explosive. Sometimes they're just factual. Signed, dated, documented. A clean divide between what was shared and what no longer is. This is the story of how silence rebuilt me. How a small room, with nothing but a bed, a lamp, and my own breath, became the first place I'd felt steady in years. And how clarity, once it arrives, doesn't leave. If you want more stories like this, quiet, honest, a little raw, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. He said it on the front porch, the words slipping out as he leaned his shoulder against the railing like he needed the wood to hold the sentence steady. "We can't afford a house." I didn't react, not with my face anyway. Instead, I tapped my banking app closed, flipped my phone face down on my thigh and kept my eyes on the thin glow of the porch light as it flickered once, almost shy. The evening air smelled like someone nearby had just mowed their yard. Fresh, damp, unsettled. I nodded, not to him, but to the sentence as a whole, as if filing it. There was a quiet in him that didn't match the quiet in me. His quiet felt like resignation. Mine felt like calibration. For a moment, I let my breathing fall into a smaller pattern, the kind you use when you're trying not to fog up a glass surface. I didn't want emotions to blur anything, not tonight, not anymore. The light hummed low. I turned my face toward the street. Everything inside me was already sorting itself. Inside, the kitchen counters still held the scatter of bills we'd ignored all week. Utilities, insurance, a stray dental charge. I gathered them slowly, clicking my nails lightly against the paper edges, stacking them into one straight, polite column. Order calms the blood. When things line up, my lungs do too. I pressed each sheet flat with the side of my hand. A soft scrape of paper against laminate followed. The kind of sound that tells you you're taking back control molecule by molecule. "Straight so I can count," I whispered. Not meant for him, not meant for anyone. Just me and the numbers and the truth no one had said aloud yet. The refrigerator hummed beside me, steady and oblivious. Outside, I could hear him pacing across the porch once, twice, then stopping like he'd run out of reasons to stay out there. I didn't call him in. Some decisions need silence more than company. When he finally stepped inside, he waited for some kind of reaction, the way a person waits for a door to click shut behind them. I didn't give him one. "I understand," I said. 2 words, level, smooth, unfrayed. My voice stayed low, just enough to feel the vibration in my chest, but not loud enough to disturb the thin line of stillness I'd managed to build around myself. He looked at me, searching my face for something, maybe hurt, maybe agreement, maybe permission. I didn't offer any of it. Instead, I focused on the rhythm of my own breath, making it even, narrow, measured. Not because I was upset, but because I needed to hear myself think. The porch light flickered again through the window, catching the rim of a cooling cup on the counter. For a second, everything in the room seemed to pause with it. I didn't explain my calm. Calm is more powerful when left uncaptioned. Later that night, alone in my corner of the living room, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I titled it with a lowercase word, house, simple, quiet, unassuming. A word that doesn't ask permission. Inside it, I uploaded photos of the bills labeled by date and hour, each file name like a breadcrumb on a private trail only I knew I was laying. The soft tapping of my keyboard felt oddly intimate, like confessing something only to myself. I drew in my knees, leaned forward, and let the blue-white glow outline the bones of my hand as I organized everything. Precision steadies me. Patterns make sense when people don't. The cursor blinked patiently at the top of the folder, like it already saw where this path would lead long before I chose to admit it. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. I kept typing. Before bed, I placed my keys on the small table beside the door, just the same way I always did. But tonight the gesture felt heavier, more deliberate. Simple objects become symbols without asking. The metal edges clicked against the wood with a clean, familiar sound, the sound of something beginning long before it looks like a beginning. I paused, fingers resting lightly on the cool metal. The porch light seeped through the window, a soft line across the floorboards, touching the keys like it recognized them. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the vent, not dramatic, not mysterious, just there, waiting for its story to unfold. I let go of the keys, slowly, intentionally, keeping my hand hovering above them for a breath before pulling back. That deliberate half-second, my fingers suspended in the warm air, felt like the moment a lock decides to shift, a pause that holds a future. The keys didn't move, but something in me did. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully climbed past the street trees, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, and my shoulders squared the way I do when I'm about to do something irreversible. The screen reflected a faint, cold blue across my knuckles as I opened a new savings account and named it with two simple words: Quiet Lake. No capitalization, no flourish, just a place for the future to settle. My finger hovered over the final confirmation button for a second longer than necessary, not out of fear but out of recognition. Change rarely announces itself. Sometimes it just waits for you to stop pretending you're not ready. I clicked. The soft electronic bell chimed once, and the numbers shifted into place. The house was silent enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me, steady and indifferent, grounding the moment. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the faint scent of leftover coffee grounds in the trash. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Just a clean beginning. By mid-morning, I'd set up an automatic transfer, small enough to go unnoticed, consistent enough to matter. Every pay cycle, the money would slip quietly out of my checking account like a tide changing beneath the surface. I typed the schedule, double-checked the routing numbers, and pressed save. "This is just precaution," I murmured, barely audible, letting the words fall flat on the table. It wasn't a rationalization, it was a contract with myself. The soft whir of the ceiling fan brushed cool air across my arms as I leaned back in the chair. I studied the screen, the clean rows of text, the confirmation email that arrived within seconds. He was still asleep in the bedroom, unaware, breathing in the slow, uneven pattern he always had when stress lingered at the edges of his dreams. I didn't resent him for it. I didn't resent anything. I simply adjusted the system of my life, one toggle at a time, until it fit the shape of who I was becoming. Quiet, yes, but firm. After lunch, I went through our expenses with a yellow notepad, scribbling numbers in columns, circling anything that sparked even a flicker of waste. I cut the small things first: the extra streaming service he never remembered to cancel, the impulse snacks tossed into our cart out of habit, the fancy iced coffees I sometimes bought on autopilot. I drank water instead, cold, clean, uncomplicated. The sound of the ice settling in the glass reminded me how small choices accumulate, how they stack into something sturdier than promises. As I highlighted the final line on the page, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. The kind that comes from trimming excess until all that remains is intention. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop and then lurched forward again, the noise fading down the block. Inside, I exhaled slowly, letting my lungs expand without resistance. Being disciplined didn't feel restrictive. It felt like solving a puzzle where I already knew the picture on the box. Later in the afternoon, I opened a fresh document and typed a simple header: minimum down payment target. The words sat there like a quiet promise. Not ambitious, not dramatic, just factual. A line of text with its own gravity. I typed the number beneath it, the smallest threshold that would open a door, even a modest one. Seeing it in black and white steadied me. It reminded me that goals don't need grand speeches to anchor themselves. They only need truth. I saved the file, listening to the faint click of the mouse button, the soft digital swoop as the document settled into the folder. For a moment, sunlight cut across the table in a thin blade, warming the back of my hand. I didn't move it away. The number felt heavy, yes, but not discouraging. Heavy like something real enough to hold. Night came with that soft blue glow only a quiet house can produce. The windows reflected a faint shimmer across the walls, and the room felt open, almost spacious. I sat cross-legged on the couch, the banking screen glowing like a small lighthouse in a dark room. The savings account balance was still tiny, almost laughable, but the presence of it mattered more than the amount. Starting points have their own kind of dignity. The ceiling fan groaned once, settling into its rhythm. I tugged a blanket over my legs and let my shoulders soften. The glow of the screen made my fingertips look pale and precise as I navigated through the settings. Every step I took tonight, every transfer, every calculation, felt like stitching a seam closed. Quiet, hidden, durable. The stillness around me wasn't empty, it was deliberate. By the time I closed my laptop, the digital clock on the stove read 10:27 p.m. I placed the computer gently on the coffee table and rested my palms on my knees, letting the silence finish the sentence I couldn't quite form. I locked my phone. I shut off the lamp. And in the low dark of the room, I felt something settle. Not confidence exactly, but alignment. A sense that the speed of my life was finally matching the rhythm I'd needed all along. I didn't tell him anything. I didn't need to. The real decisions were already made, written quietly in numbers and time. 3 months of statements printed in crisp, pale gray ink lay across my desk like a quiet map of choices. I'd taken them from the printer tray one by one, feeling the cool, smooth surface of each page against my fingertips. The smell of warm toner lingered in the air, sharp but oddly comforting. I slid the pages into a clear plastic sleeve, smoothing out the faint curls at the edges where they'd lifted from the machine. The plastic made a soft crinkling sound, a reminder that even evidence has a texture. I counted them silently. 12 pages. Each one a snapshot of small decisions that had quietly rewritten the trajectory of my life. Outside the window, a distant dog barked once, then fell silent. The afternoon sun cast thin rectangular patches of light across the table, landing directly on the numbers I'd been memorizing. With the folder halfway open, I pressed the final page flat and closed the cover gently. Proof doesn't need to shout. It only needs to exist. The next day at the bank, the waiting area felt colder than it looked. The air conditioner hummed with that sharp metallic chill that seeps through cotton sleeves. When the clerk called my name, I stood, nodded once, and followed her to a small booth separated by partial glass walls. She clicked through screens as I answered her questions. Each response clean, steady, unembellished. When she asked co-owner name, I lifted my chin a fraction and replied, "Just me." The sentence landed with a soft thud in the air between us. She typed quickly, not pausing, but the temperature in the booth seemed to shift by a degree. I kept my hands folded on my lap, thumbs lightly touching, anchoring me in place. She printed a sheet of terms, the warm paper sliding toward me with a faint hiss across the desk. "Review and sign whenever you're ready." I didn't rush. Some lines deserved to be read twice. Later, in my car, I reviewed the interest options again. Fixed rate, short term. I ran my finger slowly along the printed line indicating the safest choice, feeling the slight indent of the ink against the page. The interior smelled faintly of sun-warmed upholstery, and the radio played a low, static hum, more texture than music. I turned the volume down until it was barely audible. The fixed rate was the only route that made sense. Predictable, contained, clear. I chose it the way a person chooses a well-lit path over a scenic one. I signed the form with deliberate strokes, each letter formed without hesitation. Through the windshield, a cluster of leaves rustled in a small burst of wind, then settled again. Sometimes security isn't glamorous. Sometimes it's just choosing the option that won't shift under your feet. Back home, I downloaded the HOA fee schedule and the insurance outline, opening each document like it held a code I needed to decipher. I highlighted the potential pitfalls, the late fees, the reserve fund contributions, the annual increases printed in tiny, unapologetic font. A soft ring from the kettle announced boiling water, the steam drifting across my cheek as I poured it into a plain mug. The scent of herbal tea lifted into the air, quiet and grounding. I scribbled notes in the margins, circling the items that could turn into small storms if ignored. The house was still. Even the floorboards felt calmer under my feet. I saved each annotated file, watching the timestamps appear like silent witnesses. When I finished, I exhaled slowly, as if my lungs had been holding their own ledger. At my desk again, I scanned the signed documents and uploaded them into the digital folder. The soft whir of the scanner filled the room, rhythmic and steady, like the mechanical version of breathing. Each file popped into place with its own timestamp, the exact minute and second preserved. I liked the formality of it, the cold precision, the way time agrees to leave a footprint if you ask it to. On the screen, the folder grew more complete with every page. The light from the desk lamp cast a warm halo around my wrists as I scrolled through the files, checking for clarity, alignment, legibility. Everything was in order. Everything was real. Proof, again, without commentary. I labeled the folder one last time, adding the subheading that mattered most. Pre-approval package. The words sat cleanly on the screen, the culmination of numbers, signatures, and decisions, none of which needed to be explained to anyone. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my spine slowly, until I heard a soft click. The room felt balanced. The evening light outside dimmed into a muted gold, touching the edges of my curtains. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, absorbing the quiet satisfaction of completion. Then, I closed the laptop, the gentle thud carrying a sense of finality. Some milestones don't look like celebrations, they look like organization. The kitchen felt warmer than usual that evening, crowded with the low hum of small conversations and the clatter of glasses. He stood by the island with two of his friends, laughing lightly as he recounted a story about rent prices, waving his hand as though swatting at an invisible fly. "Better to just keep renting," he said. "Owning is overrated." I stood a few feet away, pouring water into a glass, the stream hitting the bottom with a soft, steady splash. I didn't correct him. His friends nodded along, unaware of the quiet shift happening under the surface. A faint citrus scent from a sliced lemon drifted through the air. I lifted the glass, letting the cool rim rest briefly against my lower lip before taking a sip. Their laughter rose and fell like a tide, none of it aimed at me, none of it seeking my input. I let the moment pass. Some truths are safer kept in my pocket. I made no attempt to offer an opinion, not in front of a small audience who'd drink whatever version of the story he poured into their glasses. Instead, I rinsed a bowl under warm water, the steady stream cushioning the silence I'd chosen. My reflection wavered in the chrome faucet, calm, deliberate, almost distant, the kind of expression that says more than words would. I stacked the bowl on the drying rack with a soft click, then turned back toward the counter, where empty bottles and half-eaten snacks waited to be arranged. He glanced my way once, as if expecting me to jump into the conversation. I didn't. The quiet built a boundary no one else saw, and that suited me. I wiped the countertop in slow, even strokes, the fabric gliding smoothly beneath my fingers. Silence can hold its own shape, and tonight it did. After his friends left, the kitchen looked like a map of fingerprints and half-finished decisions. I gathered the glasses first, aligning them in a neat row by the sink. The faint ring of condensation each one left behind formed a curved line on the counter, and I wiped each mark clean, watching them disappear under my cloth. He hovered behind me, not saying much, just enough of a presence to be felt but not enough to interrupt my order. The faint scent of dish soap rose as I rinsed another cup, and steam curled around my knuckles. There's a small comfort in restoring things to their place, in returning balance after someone else's noise. Traces of the evening faded under each swipe, until the kitchen looked newly reset, clean and bright under the overhead light. I breathed in slowly, letting the scent of lemon and soap mix in the air. Some rooms hold peace only when you rebuild it yourself. He broke the quiet first, resting a hand on my shoulder in that casual, public-friendly way he'd used earlier in front of his friends. "You're practical," he said, smiling like it was a compliment. I answered, neither accepting nor rejecting the label. I let the sound drop into the space between us. His hand lingered for a moment, then fell away. I kept wiping the countertop until my cloth hit the wooden edge and stopped. The room felt different now, not because of anything said, but because of what hadn't been. I straightened a utensil, nudged a stray crumb off the counter, adjusted a cutting board by a single inch. Precision is a kind of shelter. I remained in it. As I turned off the kitchen light, it flickered, once, twice, before settling into darkness. I paused with my hand still on the switch, watching the afterglow fade from the edges of the tile. The faint halo from the porch drifted in through the window, casting a soft, uneven gold across the sink. It felt like the room was breathing out after holding something too long. In that dim light, the silence thickened, stretching between us without the sharpness it once carried. I could hear his footsteps shift behind me, unsure, maybe even a little aware of the distance he hadn't noticed growing. I didn't turn around. Some moments are better left without eye contact. I finished cleaning in a slow, measured rhythm, placing each glass upside down on the rack, turning the faucet handle exactly halfway, wiping the last streak from the countertop until it gleamed under the low glow from the porch outside. When I finally looked up, he was watching me, trying to read something in the way I carried myself, but whatever he thought he saw wasn't the whole truth. I dried my hands, folded the towel neatly and stepped back, letting the quiet settle fully. The night felt steady again. Not because it had been peaceful, but because I'd reclaimed it. The email arrived just after 9 in the morning, the subject line plain enough to hide the shift it carried. Loan approval. Studio unit. I opened it at the dining table, where sunlight skimmed across the wood in thin strips, the kind that made dust motes hover like suspended breath. The numbers weren't large. The approval wasn't flashy, but it was real. Measured, attainable, practical. Exactly the kind of step that changes a life without announcing it. I scrolled through the details, tracing the terms with my fingertip as though confirming their weight. My heartbeat didn't quicken. It settled, grounded by something sturdier than excitement. The house was quiet except for the soft clatter of a neighbor's mailbox outside. I closed the laptop for a moment, resting both hands on its cool surface. This wasn't triumph. It was alignment. A little after noon, I reviewed the condo details again. Monthly fees, repair contingencies, elevator maintenance schedules. The list looked clinical, almost sterile, but I preferred facts to fantasies. I read every line twice, then circled the items that could grow teeth later if ignored. Clarity has always been easier for me than trust. With each page I scanned, I noted which costs were negotiable and which ones would stay fixed no matter how carefully I planned. The stability soothed me more than any grand view ever could. Leaning back in my chair, I caught the faint scent of laundry detergent from the clean towels drying in the next room. Familiar. Simple. Grounding. I clicked through the final conditions, tapping accept with a quiet certainty. Small doesn't mean insignificant. Small can mean secure. My calendar reminder lit up at 3:45 p.m., a soft chime followed by a neat block of text. Deposit appointment, 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. I added a second reminder 15 minutes earlier, out of habit, then checked the documents again. The lease terms were folded into a tidy envelope on the counter. The payment confirmation screen sat open on my laptop, glowing steadily like a low flame. I walked through each step in my head. Parking, signing, wiring the funds, confirming receipts. Predictability is its own kind of comfort. The air in the kitchen felt warm, almost still, carrying the faint sweetness of an apple I'd sliced earlier. I tossed the core into the trash, listening to the soft thud before washing my hands. Every motion felt intentional, pared down, as if I were clearing space not just on the counters but in myself. Tomorrow had shape now, a direction, not a guess. That evening, I drafted a simple list of essentials, items small enough to fit into one box but meaningful enough to mark the first breath of a new space. A small kettle, 2 white cups, a soft towel, a single set of sheets, a pen, a notebook. I didn't add anything indulgent. New beginnings don't need decoration. They need clarity and quiet. I folded the list once and placed it inside my wallet, between my ID and a loyalty card I rarely used. The paper felt crisp, the crease neat beneath my thumb. The smell of dinner, garlic, onions, something faintly smoky lingered in the air. I opened a window to let it drift out, replaced by cooler night air brushing lightly against my forearms. Preparation has never frightened me. It steadies me. Later that night, I visited the building again, using the public entrance to test the elevator one more time. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead, casting thin shadows that shifted as I walked. The elevator door slid open with a muted swish and I stepped inside, listening to the quiet hum of the machinery beneath the floor. The walls reflected my outline, faint and blurred by finger smudges. When the bell chimed, it was a short, clean sound, efficient, unpretentious. I stood in the empty hallway for a moment, absorbing the stillness. The air smelled faintly of paint and something floral, maybe from a neighbor's diffuser. I imagined carrying a single bag down this hallway, setting it gently on a bare floor. A space with no memories yet, only potential. I breathed in. Just enough room to exhale fully. Before bed, I typed a simple message into my phone, A reminder to myself more than anything. No one needs to know about tomorrow. I didn't send it to anyone. I just saved it as a draft, letting the words sit there like a sealed envelope I wasn't ready to open. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, then turned off the lamp. The darkness settled quickly, soft and complete, touching the edges of the room like a quiet blanket. He shifted once beside me, unaware, half asleep. His breathing rose and fell in a pattern that no longer dictated mine. I closed my eyes, steadying my own breath to a quieter rhythm. Tomorrow wouldn't announce itself. I wouldn't either. But it would still arrive. The small leather key holder arrived in a plain paper bag, folded neatly at the top. The store clerk handed it to me with a warm, unbothered smile, the kind that doesn't pry. I stepped outside and let the morning air settle around me before opening it. The leather smelled new, clean, subtle, uncreased. I ran my thumb across the edge, feeling the firmness beneath the stitching. It fit in my hand perfectly, almost as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. No ceremony, no weight of sentiment, just a quiet practicality that steadied me. I clipped it onto the metal ring, hearing a light click that barely broke the hum of passing traffic. Somewhere nearby, a bicycle rolled over gravel, the sound sharp, then fading. I turned the holder once in my palm, testing its balance. It felt right. Not symbolic, just suited. Inside the showroom, I tested a sample lock mounted on a small display board. The metal was cool against my fingertips as I inserted the key and turned. The motion slid with a half rotation, smooth and controlled, offering just enough resistance to feel real. A soft metallic tap echoed as I let the key settle back into place. I tried it again. Another quiet turn, another clean finish. The overhead lights cast a faint sheen across the polished surfaces, and I caught my own reflection in the chrome. Focused, steady, shoulders relaxed. I didn't linger. I simply nodded once to the sales associate who stood nearby, pretending not to watch, then stepped away. Some decisions don't need validation. They only need to feel clear in the hand. Before leaving, I walked through the parking level to locate the unit's mailbox and the designated parking space. The concrete floor carried a faint, dusty smell, and the echo of my footsteps bounced in soft, hollow notes. The mailbox metal felt slightly chilled when I touched it, the latch clicking cleanly under my thumb. I memorized the number, letting it ink itself into my mind without writing anything down. The parking spot was small but manageable. A rectangle outlined in yellow paint, worn slightly at the edges. I stood there for a moment, imagining pulling in late at night, headlights sweeping across the wall before shutting off. Normal. Unremarkable. Exactly what I wanted. I breathed in, letting the cool air settle into my lungs. Coordinates of a future life have a way of steadying the present. On my way out, I stopped by a small shop and picked up a tin box no bigger than my palm. It had a flat lid and a quiet, brushed metal finish that caught the light without drawing attention. When I tapped the edge with my fingernail, it made a barely audible sound, like a punctuation mark softer than a period. I imagined placing a spare key inside, nothing more. No notes, no explanations. Just the metal against metal, held in one discrete place. I paid in cash, folded the receipt neatly, and tucked the tin into my bag. The weight was insignificant, but its purpose wasn't. As I stepped outside, a breeze lifted the hem of my shirt and cooled the back of my neck. Some objects earn their meaning slowly. This one would. Walking back toward the car, I felt the first tug of habit, the instinct to call him, to share a detail, to narrate my steps the way couples sometimes do without thinking. I let the impulse rise, then fall. I didn't take out my phone. This wasn't a secret meant to punish or provoke. It was a boundary forming, quietly. the kind that doesn't ask permission. The afternoon light softened as clouds drifted overhead, muting the colors around me. A distant siren wailed briefly, then faded into the city's general hum. I reached my car, unlocked it, and slid inside, letting the door close with a muted thud. No calls, no explanations, just a choice kept intact. By the time I got home, the weight of the day had settled into my limbs, but not in a draining way, more like a grounded certainty. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, the warm water soothing the small tension in my knuckles. When I went to bed, I folded my fingers loosely, almost as if cupping something, though the key wasn't there. The shape of it lingered anyway, a quiet imprint. The room was dark, except for the soft glow from a street lamp slipping through the curtains. I lay still, breathing evenly, letting the quiet fold around me. Some steps transform you before you even recognize the distance you've already crossed. The notary office was quieter than I expected, just a soft hum from the ceiling vents and the faint rub of leather chairs shifting as people moved. The air smelled of printer ink and something faintly medicinal, like disinfectant wiped earlier that morning. I sat at the long table while the notary slid one document after another toward me, each page waiting with clean margins and unblinking lines for my signature. Sign, flip, sign. The rhythm was almost hypnotic. My pen glided across the paper with steady strokes, the crisp scratch of ink settling into the fibers. The overhead camera mounted in the corner blinked a tiny red light, recording everything in silence. When I paused to flex my fingers, the leather chair beneath me emitted a soft creak, grounding me back into the moment. This wasn't excitement. This was completion, page by page. Once the last signature dried, I transferred the deposit from my phone, watching the processing bar inch forward. My screen vibrated 3 times in quick succession, one for the transfer, one for the receipt, the last for confirmation. I exhaled slowly, letting my shoulders drop an inch. The notary glanced at the notification sounds, then handed me a stamped copy with a neutral smile. "You're all set." I nodded, lifting the cool sheet of paper between my fingers. The embossed seal felt raised under my thumb, a small physical truth. Outside the window, a tree branch scraped lightly against the glass in a slow, rhythmic sweep. The transaction wasn't large enough to impress anyone, but it didn't need to be. It was decisive, and decisiveness has its own gravity. Before leaving the building, I took a screenshot of the final confirmation page. Amount, date, time, codes. All the clean lines that make up proof. I saved the image into my folder labeled Ledger and backed it up once more out of habit. The digital click of the save button sounded louder in my head than in the air. I stood by the hallway wall, the faint pattern of textured paint cool against my arm, and reviewed the file one more time. Everything was clear, legible, orderly. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a pale glow across the screen. A single file, small enough to fit in any device, yet weighted enough to shift the balance of an entire future. I locked my phone, slipped it into my bag, and walked toward the exit with a steadier spine. When I reached the studio for the first official inspection, the room felt larger than I remembered. Maybe it was the quiet. No furniture, no echoes of anyone else's life. Just blank walls, waiting to hold whatever came next. I stepped inside and let the door click shut behind me. The sound traveled softly through the empty space. The key in my hand felt heavier than usual, though its weight hadn't changed. I walked across the room, listening to my footsteps land in even, unhurried beats. The air held the faint scent of new paint and dust still settling. I ran my fingertips along the edge of the windowsill, feeling the subtle grit the last cleaning crew had missed. Empty rooms breathe differently. This one breathed with possibility. I stood at the center of the room, holding the key loosely, letting it rest against my palm. The metal warmed slowly as I closed my fingers around it. My spine straightened without effort, as though the quiet itself was pulling me into better posture. A distant hum, maybe from a vent or an unseen pipe, shivered along the walls, then faded. I inhaled once, deep and slow, feeling the air fill the open space around me. There was no second voice to account for, no footsteps overlapping mine, no expectations pressing against the edges of the moment. Just a room, a key, and a life dividing cleanly into before and after. By the time I stepped back out into the hallway, the paperwork and screenshots and signatures had merged into a single, steady truth. I tucked the key into my pocket, feeling its outline press lightly through the fabric with each step. No announcements, no explanations. Just progress shaped in silence. As the elevator doors opened with a low chime, I caught my reflection in the brushed metal. Calm, a little tired, but undeniably sure. I entered the elevator, let the doors close, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Some days change you quietly. Today was one of them. The sound of his suitcase rolling across the hardwood was sharp enough to slice through the late afternoon quiet. The plastic wheels clicked over each seam in the floor, a steady, deliberate rhythm that didn't rush and didn't apologize. I stood by the doorway, fingers lightly resting on the frame, listening as he adjusted the handle and shifted his weight. The air carried a faint trace of detergent from his freshly washed clothes, mixed with the warm scent of the house settling from the day's heat. He didn't look up immediately. He just kept moving toward the living room, suitcase trailing behind him like an unspoken sentence. When he finally stopped, the silence expanded, stretching between us in a long, thin line. The suitcase wheels clicked once more as they settled. I kept my breathing even. "I think I need some space," he said, staring somewhere past my shoulder, as if avoiding the weight of his own words. "Time away from the marriage." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and oddly formal, as though he'd practiced it in his head and couldn't find a softer version. I watched the muscles in his jaw shift, then settle. His hands tightened around the suitcase handle, knuckles turning pale beneath the pressure. The refrigerator hummed behind me, filling the room with a low vibration that felt steadier than either of us. I didn't step closer. Distance had already chosen its place. "How long?" I asked, my voice level enough that it surprised even me. He hesitated, 1 second then 2, as though he hoped I might interrupt with something emotional, something that would give him an easier exit. I didn't. "I'm not sure," he said quietly, almost shrinking inside the words. The house remained still. A small draft brushed against my ankle from the window we'd left cracked open earlier. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. If someone can't stay, insisting won't pull them back. Sometimes the most honest question deserves the simplest answer. And he didn't have one. My eyes drifted to the kitchen shelf where our matching mugs sat, 2 plain white cups bought on a whim one weekend when we'd been in sync without trying. Only one had been used lately. The space beside it felt colder than the ceramic itself. I traced the edge of the shelf with my fingertip, feeling the faint dust that had settled around the unused cup. The difference between 2 and 1 can shift the entire temperature of a room. Behind me, he shifted his weight again, the suitcase wheels creaking as they tilted. Nothing dramatic, just absence forming its outline. "Okay," I said quietly, the word landing gently but firmly. No pleading, no arguments. Just a clear, steady acceptance that didn't need to raise its voice. His shoulders fell a fraction, maybe from relief, maybe from regret. It was hard to tell from where I stood. The clock on the wall ticked once, a small, clean sound. I stepped aside to give him room. The movement simple and controlled. Sometimes the hardest decisions are made not in the heat of conflict, but in the coolness of clarity. And clarity had been building in me for months. As he rolled the suitcase toward the door, something inside me shifted, not broken, not bruised, but rearranged. A readiness I hadn't fully admitted rose quietly to the surface. I didn't reach for him. I didn't follow him. I simply watched the doorframe catch the last bit of sunlight as he passed through it, the brightness bending around his silhouette. The click of the latch echoed through the hallway, soft but definite. I exhaled, slow and controlled. Some moments don't shatter you. They reveal what's already healed. I opened the drawer in the hallway and reached for the small bundle I had prepared days earlier. Key, access fob, the printed Wi-Fi instructions folded cleanly into thirds. The paper had a faint scent of toner, still sharp along the creases. I laid everything out on the console table, aligning each item in a straight line. The house was still, carrying the soft warmth of late afternoon sun creeping across the floorboards. My fingers moved without hesitation, placing the key into a plain brown envelope, the fob beside it, the instructions tucked neatly behind. The envelope felt light in my hand, almost weightless, despite what it represented. I sealed it with a slow press of my thumb along the edge. Preparation makes parting easier. I'd learned that long before today. With a black pen, I wrote 2 simple words across the front. Temporary stay. Nothing emotional, nothing coded. Just a description accurate enough to stand on its own. The ink sank into the paper, drying quickly. I held the envelope for a moment, feeling the faint give of the material under my fingers. Outside, a car door shut somewhere on the street, the sound muted by the walls, but still sharp enough to pull the air taut. I set the envelope down and smoothed the surface gently, aligning it with the edge of the table. When something is meant to be transitional, naming it helps keep expectations from expanding. When he returned for a few things, I handed him the envelope without ceremony. He blinked, caught off guard, his fingers tightening around the handle of the suitcase. "What's this?" "A place to stay for now," I said, my voice calm, steady. His gaze flicked across my face, searching for an explanation I didn't owe him. Then he looked down at the envelope, turning it over once as if to measure its intent. I didn't elaborate, I didn't soften it. Sometimes the cleanest truths are the ones spoken without decoration. "This is unexpected," he murmured, eyes lingering on the neatly written label. "It's quiet," I answered, "and it's yours for the time being." He swallowed, the movement small but visible. A faint draft slipped through the doorway, brushing past the hem of my shirt. His fingers traced the corner of the envelope. "When did you—" "It doesn't matter." His shoulders lifted in a brief, uncertain breath. He wasn't used to me offering solutions without asking for acknowledgement in return. But this wasn't a gesture for him, it was a boundary for me. He looked at the key again, almost startled by the weight of what it implied. "You got this recently." I didn't answer. Silence can be a shield when words would only invite questions that no longer deserve answers. He nodded slowly, as though piecing together a puzzle with corners already missing. The refrigerator hummed behind us, filling the space with a familiar steady vibration. I kept my arms loose at my sides, not defensive, just clear. Some truths are meant to be discovered, not delivered. After he left, the air felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just reorganized. I closed the door gently, the latch catching with a soft final click. A breeze moved the curtain beside the window, brushing light across the floor in shifting patterns. I stood there for a moment, letting my breath even out. The envelope in his hand was only logistics. The person I had become while preparing it, that was the real departure. The key slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sharper sound than I expected. Metal against wood, crisp and full, echoing just long enough to draw both our eyes to the same spot. He froze for a moment, staring at it as though it had fallen from a greater height. The clean ring of the impact seemed to stretch through the hallway, quieting everything else, the hum of the fridge, the soft buzz of a distant appliance. He crouched down slowly, and the floorboard under his knee gave a muted creak. I watched without speaking, my hands resting lightly on the counter behind me. Sometimes a small sound becomes a truth all on its own. When he picked up the key, he turned it over in his palm, noticing the faint imprint of the Postal Service symbol on the fob. His brow furrowed. "You bought this from the post office?" he asked, voice lower than usual, less certain. I didn't respond. I simply watched him process the detail he should have seen much earlier, the kind of detail that changes the temperature of a room by a degree or two. He shifted his weight, standing fully, the key resting awkwardly between his fingers. Silence softened the walls around us. My lack of an answer made him pause longer than he intended. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, though it didn't sound like a real question. It sounded like an instinct, one he hadn't revised for the reality in front of him. I breathed in once, steady, letting the air cool the back of my throat. There was no explanation to give. Some choices don't need a narrative, they speak for themselves. He looked at me the way someone looks at a locked door, unsure whether they're meant to knock or walk away. He crouched again, this time adjusting the key as though trying to read something in its metal edges. His fingertips brushed the floor and he paused, palm pressed briefly against the cool surface. When he looked up, his expression wasn't confrontational. It was slower, more careful, like he was recalibrating the entire story he thought he knew. The wooden floor felt colder beneath him, and the stillness between us grew taut but not sharp. He blinked once, slowly, as if settling into an understanding he hadn't prepared for. His hand tightened around the key. The weight of it had finally become real. I moved toward the door and opened it, not abruptly, just enough to let the outside air slip in. The faint scent of evening, something like warm asphalt cooling, drifted through the frame. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't ask him to leave. I simply stood there, giving space for the truth to catch up to the moment. He looked from the door to the key and then back to me, as if realizing that every answer he'd been searching for was already visible. Clarity doesn't always arrive with volume. Sometimes it enters on quiet feet. He gave a small nod, uncertain, almost reflexive. I didn't return it. The key rested firmly in his grip now, and whatever he understood or didn't understand belonged to him alone. I stepped aside, letting the air shift between us. He walked past me without a word, the soft tread of his shoes fading down the hallway. I closed the door slowly, feeling the latch catch with a clean, precise click. Some endings don't announce themselves. They simply form, the way a room settles after something sharp has fallen. The legal office was cool and sharply lit, the kind of place where silence feels structured, not accidental. I handed the attorney the folder I'd prepared the night before. Each document aligned so cleanly, the edges looked machine-cut. He flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency, pausing only once to adjust his glasses. "Titled as separate property?" he asked. "Yes." My voice didn't waver. He marked a note beside the line item, the pen scratching lightly across the paper. The faint scent of toner clung to the air, mixing with the sterile clean of the building's ventilation system. When he nodded, it wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement that everything was already in order. The moment felt like a hinge shifting, quiet but definitive. He slid a receipt across the table, the paper still warm from the printer. I pressed my fingertip to the timestamp, 9:42 a.m. A small, factual confirmation that didn't need interpretation. "Keep this with your records," he said. I slipped it into the folder, making sure the edges lined up before closing it. The click of the clasp felt neat and final. No emotion tied itself to the paper. It was just a fact, filed where it belonged. Outside the office window, branches swayed lightly, brushing shadows across the wall. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and thanked him. Some steps don't feel triumphant. They feel correct. At the copying station, I placed each document into a thin cardboard file, pressing the metal fasteners down until they snapped into place. The sound echoed softly in the otherwise empty hallway. I labeled the folder in small, even handwriting, then stacked the supporting forms behind it, aligning the corners with deliberate care. Paper carries a different weight when it closes a loophole rather than opens one. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the glossy tabletop. I gathered everything under my arm, feeling the stiffness of the cardboard press lightly against my side. Organization can be a kind of armor, quiet, inconspicuous, and utterly effective. Walking back toward the elevator, I reviewed the final addendum in my mind. All assets acquired during separation designated as individually held. No ambiguity. No permissions required. The paperwork ensured that no argument, no conversation, no sudden change of heart could override what had been signed. It was a strange kind of calm, knowing that control now lived on paper instead of in emotion. I pressed the elevator button, feeling the cool metal respond beneath my thumb. Some people fight with words. I prefer documents. When the elevator doors opened, the faint scent of floor polish mingled with a trace of someone's cologne. The car was empty, quiet enough to hear the soft mechanical pulse of its cables. I stepped in and checked the emergency contact information printed on the small metal plaque. Then, without thinking too hard about it, I updated the contact on my phone from his name back to my own. The motion was simple. Tap, delete, replace. But the effect settled deeper than I expected. Sometimes clarity is just removing a name that no longer fits the role. Outside, the hallway greeted me with a gentle draft, as though the building exhaled every time someone walked through its doors. I held the folder close to my side, not protectively, just securely. My shoes clicked along the polished floor, each step measured, each stride unhurried. When I reached the exit, the sunlight met me with a brightness I hadn't expected. I took a slow breath, letting it warm the bridge of my nose. Paperwork completed, boundaries placed, a future reorganized. Sunlight spilled into the studio when I opened the blinds, falling directly across the stack of documents on the counter. The certificates and printouts glowed beneath the morning light, edges turned soft by the brightness. The air smelled faintly of drywall and the lingering sweetness of whatever cleanser the maintenance crew used. I stepped closer, letting my shadow cross the papers before I smoothed the top sheet with my palm. The room was silent, except for the soft buzz of a distant air vent, a calm, steady sound that settled at the base of my spine. Standing in that gentle wash of light, I felt the weight of the work behind me and the simplicity of the space ahead. No clutter, no noise. Just clarity bathed in gold. I picked up the spare key and placed it inside the tin box I'd purchased earlier. The metal gave off a soft, muted tap as it met the bottom. I closed the lid, pressing gently until it sealed with a quiet, confident snap. The box felt cool against my palm, smooth and unassuming. I set it on the shelf beside the window, the sunlight brushing its edge with a thin line of warmth. Everything about the moment felt contained, abstract tension folding itself neatly away. No drama, no hesitation. Just a practical gesture that made the space feel more secure. I walked slowly around the studio, taking stock of every corner. The light switches clicked crisply under my fingertips. The door latch responded with a firm, clean sound. Even the small under-cabinet light blinked on with a soft glow that felt more comforting than I expected. I plugged in the small lamp I'd brought with me, its warm bulb filling the room with a subtle amber halo. "Settle first," I murmured under my breath. The words weren't a command, just a reminder that stability grows from small, steady actions. I folded the one towel I'd brought and placed it on the bathroom rail. Every object looked deliberate. Every step felt earned. At the door, I tested the deadbolt twice, once from the inside, once from the hall. Each click carried a clean certainty that grounded me deeper into the moment. I checked the door viewer, noting the slight blur around the edges. Acceptable, but something I'd replace later. Back inside, the room held its quiet shape. The walls reflected a faint warmth from the lamp, and the stillness felt neither empty nor lonely. Just honest. I ran a hand along the countertop, smooth and cool beneath my palm, and listened to the small, settling sounds of the building. A pipe contracting, a distant door closing on another floor. Everything answered with precision. On the refrigerator door, I taped a small sheet of paper with 3 simple rules written in clean handwriting. Quiet, clean, on time. Nothing else needed elaboration. The tape smoothed under my thumb, making a light crinkling noise as it bonded with the surface. I stepped back, taking in the minimalism of the studio, a kind of honesty I hadn't realized I'd missed. The faint scent of fresh paint drifted from the hallway each time I opened the door, like a reminder that beginnings require their own kind of air. I left the rules in place, uncomplicated and firm. I stood in the patch of sunlight near the center of the room, letting the warmth rest against my collarbone. The light stretched long across the floor, illuminating the quiet, empty space like a clean slate. Nothing in the room demanded my attention. Nothing contradicted me. Nothing took more than it gave. For a moment, I simply breathed, letting the stillness settle into my ribs. This room did not know my past. It knew only what I chose to bring into it. And that, more than anything, felt like the first honest step forward. He arrived at the studio unannounced, standing in the doorway with a look that hovered somewhere between confusion and concern. I was at the small counter, pouring hot water over a tea bag, steam rising in thin ribbons toward the ceiling. "Why didn't you tell me about this place?" he asked. I placed the cup gently on the counter, the porcelain making a soft circular sound as it met the surface. Instead of answering immediately, I watched the steam drift upward, letting the moment breathe. There are questions that deserve honesty, but not urgency. I turned to him, calm and centered. The tea's warmth brushed my fingertips. "You never asked," I said, keeping my voice even, not accusatory. The sentence landed lightly, but it carried its own clean truth. His eyes flickered, surprised, maybe even unsettled by the lack of defensiveness. He stepped inside, glancing around the minimalist space. The single lamp, the neatly folded towel, the empty counters. There was no clutter for him to hide behind, no distractions to soften the quiet between us. The tea bag bobbed gently in the cup behind me, releasing a faint herbal smell into the air. Sometimes, simplicity leaves nowhere for excuses to sit. His gaze traveled slowly across the studio, as though mapping it for the first time. The place was bare by design. One chair, one mug, one folded blanket. Everything pared down to necessity. "You're really staying here?" he asked, the question carrying a thin layer of disbelief. "I'm living here," I corrected, setting the boundary not with emotion but with precision. He looked down, shifting his foot across the floor, the rubber sole making a faint dragging sound. The room didn't echo. It absorbed him quietly, the way it had absorbed me. He stood near the counter, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing the absence of anything shared. The simplicity seemed to unsettle him more than any confrontation could have. "There's nothing here," he said softly. "There's enough," I replied. He let the words linger between us, as if testing their structure. The radiator clicked once in the background, settling with the cooling air. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when they realize they've miscalculated something important. This wasn't a temporary refuge. It was a choice I had already made. I lifted the teacup, the warmth seeping into the base of my palm, and took a small sip. The heat traveled down my throat, loosening the tightness I hadn't admitted was there. He watched, waiting for elaboration, for softness,
for some open door back into the version of us he was familiar with. But the room held its stillness. Nothing here was built for negotiation. The light from the lamp cast a soft glow along the wall, shaping the silence with clean edges. I let the tea rest in my hand, steady and warm.
This was the most peace I'd felt in months. A quiet stretched between us, not hostile, not cold, just honest. He seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but in expectation. The studio offered no shared history, no sentimental foothold, no reason for me to soften the truth. Finally, he nodded, though he didn't seem to know why. I placed the cup gently on the counter, the sound soft but final. There was nothing to argue over, nothing to repair, just a clean boundary standing calmly where silence used to be. The financial advisor's office was softly lit with warm bulbs that made the wooden shelves glow like muted amber. He reviewed my file with a careful, measured rhythm, flipping each page as though assessing a blueprint rather than a life. "The structure works best if everything stays under a single owner," he said, tapping a modest stack of documents with the end of his pen. I nodded, absorbing the clarity of his tone. The faint hum of a small air purifier filled the background, steady as a metronome. Nothing about the moment felt dramatic. It felt like tightening a loose screw, simple, necessary, quietly stabilizing. We moved through insurance options and tax implications, each topic presented with calm efficiency. His cursor traced a clean line across a chart that displayed potential savings. I watched the columns settle into cents, each number building toward a future with fewer unknowns. The soft scent of his freshly brewed coffee lingered in the room, blending with the sterile paper smell of printed spreadsheets. "Optimize where you can," he said. The advice wasn't emotional. Neither was my acceptance of it. I signed the recommended adjustments, each stroke of my pen neat and unhurried. Next came the beneficiary review. He pivoted his monitor toward me, displaying a series of fields to update. "Make sure this matches your intentions," he said. It did. I typed the necessary names, deleted others, and confirmed the choices with a slow, steady breath. Removing old entries felt lighter than I expected, like clearing dust from a window rather than erasing anything meaningful. The mouse clicked softly with each confirmation, the sound small but definitive. Paperwork doesn't heal, but it does clarify. And clarity is its own kind of relief. He recommended a set of financial alerts, layered notifications designed to track activity with precision. "Transparency is easier than trust," he said, not unkindly. I agreed. He guided me through the setup, each prompt crisp and straightforward. When the final alert activated, a tiny vibration buzzed in my phone, subtle enough to feel like a whisper. Security isn't a feeling for me. It's a system that answers without hesitation. We closed the tabs one by one, the screen returning to the calm glow of the desktop. Before leaving, I reviewed the digital summary he emailed. Concise paragraphs, clean formatting, no unnecessary flourishes. I saved the file under a simple title, then added the date. The folder on my drive now held a sequence of steps that felt like a spine. Upright, organized, reliable. The office door opened briefly as someone exited, carrying a faint breeze inside. It brushed across my cheek before fading. I zipped my bag, feeling the weight settle comfortably across my shoulder. Everything was where it belonged, including me. Outside, the air smelled faintly of warm pavement and a hint of the nearby lawn. My shadow stretched long across the walkway as the sun dipped behind a building. I walked with steady steps, each one landing cleanly, unhurried. The documents in my bag didn't shout for attention. They simply existed, ready when needed, quiet when not. As I reached the sidewalk, the breeze lifted the hem of my shirt, cool and reassuring. Order had replaced uncertainty. Progress had replaced noise, and my path felt straighter than it had in a long time. The hallway light flickered once as I inserted the key into the studio door. A brief pulse that painted the walls in a thin wash of amber before returning to stillness. I paused with my hand on the metal, feeling the cool edge of the key press lightly into my palm. The corridor smelled faintly of detergent and warm dust, a scent I'd grown oddly accustomed to. The lock turned with a smooth half-rotation, the mechanism catching softly. I didn't rush. Some thresholds deserve a measured crossing. I breathed in, steady, before pushing the door open. Inside, I turned the key again, just halfway, and stopped, letting it rest in the lock without clicking fully into place. Not everything needs to be secured to be safe. The room held its familiar quiet, warm from the late afternoon sun sliding across the floor. I let my fingers fall from the key and stood still, absorbing the subtle shift in the air as the door settled behind me. Living alone teaches you the difference between shutting a door and locking one. Today, leaving it slightly open felt like enough. I set my bag down, smoothing the strap flat against the table. Enough, I said softly to myself, the word landing with a gentle certainty. It wasn't a declaration, it was a release. The studio absorbed the sound the way it absorbed everything. Quietly, without resistance. I filled a glass with water, letting the tap run for a moment until it cooled. The first sip eased the dryness in my throat, grounding me back into my body. Sometimes speaking a simple truth aloud is a way of letting it settle. I straightened the blanket at the foot of the bed, folding it once, then again, until the corners met cleanly. The single pillow sat centered against the headboard, a quiet symbol of the life I was choosing with intention rather than reaction. The fabric held a faint scent of detergent, warm and familiar. I smoothed the pillowcase with the back of my hand, listening to the soft rustle of cotton beneath my fingers. There's a peace in caring for a space that reflects you without negotiation. On the refrigerator, I pinned a small handwritten note. Keep meals simple. The ink was slightly smudged at the edges where I'd touched it before the gel dried. The kitchen held only the essentials: salt, pepper, honey. Each item chosen, not accumulated. I placed a single apple on the counter, its red skin catching the soft overhead light. Simplicity tastes different when you choose it. Lighter, cleaner, more honest. As evening settled, I lay down early, letting the cool sheets wrap around me. The room exhaled in soft creaks as the temperature dipped, the kind of sounds that once reminded me of emptiness but now felt like alignment. My eyelids grew heavy, and the quiet pressed gently against me, not imprisoning but comforting. In the drifting seconds before sleep, I pictured myself walking through an open doorway, not leaving something behind but stepping towards something steadier. I closed my eyes fully. Rest came easily. His mother called just after dinner, her voice sharp enough to cut through the calm of my evening. "You're being cold," she said, skipping any greeting. I walked to the small table near the window, the phone warm against my cheek. Outside, dusk settled into a soft blue, brushing the rooftops with fading light. "I'm being clear," I replied, keeping my tone even. She exhaled a tight breath, the kind meant to signal disappointment without saying it outright. I opened my calendar with my free hand, scanning the upcoming days. "When everything is defined, conversations stay cleaner," I said. It wasn't an explanation, just a boundary stated plainly. She tried again, her voice rising a little. "Families talk, They don't maintain schedules like business partners. I don't take calls after 9, I said calmly. A simple sentence, but it reshaped the entire conversation. Silence followed, long enough for me to hear the soft click of the refrigerator cycling behind me. I suppose you're very busy, she finally replied. I'm consistent, I answered, placing my palm flat on the table to steady myself. Consistency is its own language, even when others don't want to learn it. His aunt called next, less accusatory, more curious, but still circling the same unspoken question. What changed? I'm listening, I told her politely, but here's what I won't do. I listed my boundaries one by one, each one spoken without heat, without hurry. The line went quiet except for her faint breathing, uneven and unsure. People expect conflict when they push. They rarely expect clarity. I hear you, she murmured. That's enough, I said, and meant it. When the call ended, the silence in the studio felt like a clean sheet of paper. I refused to let anyone rename my decisions, not with guilt, not with nostalgia, not with their version of loyalty. I walked to the window and cracked it open. Cool night air drifted in, carrying a faint scent of laundry from somewhere below. I rested my hand on the sill, feeling the wood grain beneath my fingertips. Peace, I'd learned, doesn't arrive because life becomes easier. It arrives when you stop giving other people the pen to your story. The studio remained still, solid around me, and so was I. A gentle breeze brushed the curtain and lifted a few strands of hair from my shoulder. The room smelled faintly of soap, simple, familiar, steady. I turned on the kettle, the soft rumble filling the quiet as it warmed. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself standing straight, shoulders relaxed, expression unforced. Not cold, not defensive, just certain. I poured hot water into a mug, the steam rising in a thin, twisting trail. Certainty tastes like this, warm, clean, uncomplicated. When I finally sat down, I let the mug rest between my palms, absorbing the heat that gathered there. The studio felt neither small nor temporary. It felt right-sized for the person I was becoming. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly brushing the walls with a soft shimmer before fading. I took a slow sip and placed the mug gently on the table. I didn't feel cold. I felt aligned, and alignment has its own kind of warmth. Rumors traveled faster than truth, and somehow they reached me before I cared to listen. A place like that? Someone must be backing her, a friend of a friend posted online. Another added, nobody moves out alone without help. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of my studio's small corner, a clean countertop with a single mug, the soft glow of the lamp catching the curve of its handle. No caption, no explanation. The image spoke for itself. A space built without applause, without witnesses, without anyone else's fingerprints. The faint scent of tea still lingered in the air as I set the phone down. Rumors evaporate when there's nothing to stick to. Hours later, I heard the ripple. The comments quieted, the speculation thinned. Silence reclaimed the thread. It always does when there's nothing dramatic to fuel it. People lose interest when the story doesn't bend into the shape they expect. I wiped down the countertop, the cloth slipping smoothly under my palm. The simple motion steadied me more than any public defense ever could. The studio felt grounded, the kind of quiet that holds its own gravity. Let them guess. I didn't owe anyone a narrative. My phone buzzed once, an old friend checking in with a message only 3 words long. Are you okay? I replied with one word. Fine. Then I attached a picture of the blank white wall across from me, sunlight cutting a narrow stripe along its center. No faces, no clutter, no signal of turmoil, just a clean surface. Sometimes, the simplest images answer questions better than explanations.
Her reply came quickly. Then I'm glad. Nothing more. The exchange settled softly, like dust drifting back onto a shelf. I spent the afternoon reorganizing the spice drawer, if you could call it that. It held 3 things: salt, pepper, honey. I removed each jar,
Wiped the inside of the drawer with a warm cloth, and placed them back in a straight line. Order in miniature. The honey jar caught the light, glowing amber for a moment as if borrowing warmth from the sun. I didn't need more than this. Life feels lighter when you stop padding it with excess. The drawer closed with a muted slide, the kind of sound that confirms simplicity can be its own form of luxury. I opened the window to let in the afternoon air. The light shifted, spreading across the floor in soft shapes. Dust sparkled briefly, catching the sun before sinking out of sight. The room breathed with me, warm and quiet. Nothing demanded my attention. Nothing asked me to explain myself. I leaned against the frame and let the breeze brush my cheek. This was the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, slowly, until your body learns its weight. As evening approached, I caught my reflection in the blank window pane. Shoulders relaxed, expression calm. A faint curve at the corner of my mouth. Not a smile, just recognition. The person looking back wasn't hiding or performing. She was simply here, in a small studio with steady walls and clean air, living a life that made sense again. I turned off the lamp, letting the room dim to a soft twilight. The quiet didn't echo. It held me. He showed up near sunset, standing in the doorway with the same suitcase he'd left with, wheels slightly scuffed from whatever days he'd spent elsewhere. "I need a place, just until things settle," he said. His voice wasn't sharp, just tired, stretched thin around the edges. I didn't move from where I stood by the counter. The studio smelled faintly of warm linen from the laundry I'd folded earlier. "You can stay," I said, gesturing to the table. A printed sheet lay there, terms clear, short, without embellishment. He glanced down at it, blinking as though reading a language he'd never learned. "This is what you need first," I added. Not unkind, just true. He picked up the paper, eyes tracing each line. "When did we start doing this?" he asked, voice low. "When we stopped understanding each other by assumption," I said. His jaw tightened, not in anger but in realization. The studio remained still, holding the weight of the moment without amplifying it. "If you want to stay," I continued, "sign. No negotiation, no emotional bargaining, just the terms as they were, clear, neutral, consistent." He swallowed once, setting the paper back down. "Okay," he murmured, softer than the quiet around us. He explained the situation in fragments: a lost contract, a temporary crash in work, a friend's couch that wasn't as available as promised. "Fine," I said. "You don't have to justify it." He looked up with something like gratitude, or maybe just worn-out relief, but I didn't fill the silence for him. This wasn't a reunion, it was logistics. He nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. The room held steady, unchanged by his presence. I didn't ask questions I didn't need answers to. Some truths serve only the person carrying them. I showed him the small table near the door where the schedule sat: payment dates, duration, expectations. He read each bullet point slowly, shoulders sagging as the reality of clarity replaced the comfort of vagueness. "I'll follow it," he said. "You should," I replied. I entered his name into the door log system, fingers moving calmly across the keypad. No hidden meanings, no promises, just access defined by rules instead of emotion. The mechanical beep as the system registered him sounded clean, almost polite. The studio stayed neutral, its own kind of witness. He sat down at the table, pen in hand, hesitating before signing. The pen scratched lightly against the paper, a slow, almost reluctant sound. The moment felt less like agreement and more like acknowledgement. of what he no longer had, and of what this space no longer represented. He slid the signed form back toward me. His eyes didn't ask for softness, and mine didn't offer it. Behind him, the small lamp cast a warm glow along the wall, steady and unbothered. "Is that everything?" he asked. "For now," I said. I slipped the signed sheet into a thin folder and placed it in the drawer beside the counter. The paper made a soft rustle as it settled into place. He looked around the studio, as if seeing it with new eyes. Its minimalism, its order, its lack of space for anything unspoken. His shoulders lowered, not defeated, just resigned. The arrangement was clear. Presence by terms, not by history. I walked past him and switched off the overhead light, leaving only the warm lamp in the corner. The room felt balanced again. So did I. The first payment arrived exactly on time, 9 a.m. on the dot. My phone vibrated with 3 short pulses, the banking app confirming the transfer. I stood near the window, the morning light settling across my shoulders in a soft, muted stripe. The studio smelled faintly of the oatmeal I'd cooked earlier, warm and grounding. I didn't smile and I didn't sigh. The notification was neither victory nor comfort. It was simply proof that clarity works better than hope. I placed the phone face down on the table, letting the screen darken. Even punctuality feels different when it's driven by terms instead of affection. Later, I checked the entry log. 1 swipe in at 7:42 a.m., 1 swipe out at 8:05 a.m. The information sat cleanly on the screen, free from interpretation. I closed the app without adding any thought to it. He walked past me in the kitchen a few minutes later, offering a polite nod, the kind people give strangers they share a hallway with. I returned it with equal neutrality. There was no tension in the air, just an absence of anything unnecessary. The kettle clicked softly behind me as it cooled. Data, I'd learned, asks for nothing. People often ask for too much. That afternoon I placed the schedule on the table. "Late by 1 day ends the arrangement," I reminded him, my tone steady. He didn't argue. "I understand," he said, eyes lowered to the printed lines. The words didn't carry resentment, just awareness. I could feel him recalibrating, the way someone does when they realize the softer version of you is not returning. I folded the schedule once, sliding it back into the drawer. This wasn't a warning, it was maintenance. Clarity is kinder than ambiguity ever was. He stayed quiet for most of the evening. Not the silent treatment, just a quiet that didn't reach for me, didn't press against the edges of the room. I matched it. We moved around each other with a polite distance, like 2 people sharing a waiting room rather than a history. A bowl clinked against the sink. A chair scraped lightly across the floor. Neutral sounds. No emotional subtitles attached. The studio didn't distort the quiet. It held it in place, making it easier to breathe. I stepped out onto the small landing outside the door and watered the little plant I'd placed there, a simple green cutting in a white ceramic pot. Tiny leaves had started to unfurl along the stem, pale but determined. I tilted the pot slightly to let excess water drain, listening to the faint patter against the concrete. Growth doesn't need noise, it just needs space. The evening air brushed cool against my forearms, carrying a faint scent of someone's dinner drifting from another floor. The plant looked steady. So did I. By the time I returned inside, he had already gone to bed, leaving the living area quietly intact. I locked the door once, hearing the clean click settle into place. The lamp cast a soft amber glow across the room, smoothing the corners into gentler shapes. I lay down early, letting my body sink into the cool sheets. Nothing felt heavy. Nothing felt unfinished. The quiet had become a structure, solid, balanced, self-sustaining. I closed my eyes. The night held steady. On the 30th day, I drafted the notice, A concise paragraph, no softness, no sharpness, just clean language that laid out the end of the arrangement. I read it twice, making sure every sentence carried the exact weight it needed and nothing more. Effective immediately. 30-day occupancy concluded. All terms fulfilled. The cursor blinked at the end of the final line, patient and still. I printed the letter, the machine humming a steady rhythm behind me. The paper slid out warm and slightly curled at the edges. I folded it neatly, tucking it into an envelope. The studio was quiet except for the faint buzz of the refrigerator. Legal clarity doesn't tremble. It just speaks, plainly. At the table I opened my ledger, deposits in, deposits out. Each line crisp, each date matching exactly. The totals balanced perfectly. A small proof of what structure can accomplish. No annotations, no emotional footnotes. Just numbers doing what numbers do. I closed the notebook gently, smoothing my hand across the cover before setting it aside. The room felt lighter, as though the clean accounting had exhaled. Paper doesn't argue, it aligns. At the bottom of the letter I added one final sentence. Wishing peace for both of us. Not sentimental, not symbolic. Just the truth, written without resistance. I didn't hesitate over the words. They came easily, the way a final period does when you finish a page without regret. I sealed the envelope and placed it at the end of the counter, its white edge catching the soft afternoon light. The scent of freshly brewed tea drifted from the kettle behind me. Sometimes sincerity is small and quiet, not grand, but it's still sincerity. I walked the letter to the door and set it gently on the mat. The envelope dipped slightly on one side. The corner had absorbed a trace of moisture from my fingertips. Outside, the hallway was still, filled with the faint hum of air conditioning. I stood there for a moment, letting the soft, cool draft brush against my ankles. There was no heaviness, no ache, just the sense of something concluding the way it was always meant to, cleanly. Then I returned inside, closing the door with a soft push that didn't echo. Later, I carried a small bag of trash down to the bins. The hallway lights hummed overhead, steady and faint. When the elevator arrived, it opened with a single short chime. Calm, routine. I stepped inside, the metal walls reflecting a muted version of my silhouette. On the ground floor, I tossed the bag, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and made my way back. Each step felt uncomplicated. No lingering question tugged at me, no unfinished thread pulling backward. Just motion, clean, forward, unburdened. Back in the studio, I washed my hands and dried them on the small kitchen towel. The fabric was soft, worn from use, familiar in a comforting way. I hung it neatly on its hook and let the quiet settle into the room again. Nothing felt uncertain. Nothing felt missing. The letter at the door waited without emotion, without urgency, simply present, ready. I sat down, exhaled slowly, and let the evening settle into its natural shape. Some closings feel like relief, not loss. This was one of them. He left early in the morning before the sun had risen high enough to touch the hallway windows. I heard the faint roll of his suitcase wheels, small, controlled, almost careful, as they disappeared down the corridor. No door slammed, no final word was offered. Just the quiet retreat of someone who understood. The ending hadn't arrived suddenly but gradually, the way light fades from a room without anyone noticing the exact moment. I stayed inside, listening as the elevator chimed softly in the distance. Then silence returned, settling cleanly into place. I didn't follow the sound. I didn't need to. I sent him one final message. Keep the key or drop it in the mailbox. A simple, neutral line, the kind that closes a chapter without reopening anything. I placed the phone on the counter and let the screen dim. Across the room, the morning light began to slip through the blinds, forming thin bars of brightness on the floor. The quiet felt gentle, not empty, not lonely, just present. Some endings don't require ceremony, they just require clarity. I didn't check the hallway to see if he'd hesitated or turned back. I didn't stand by the window listening for footsteps. His departure belonged to him, not to me. In the kitchen, I washed a single cup, the warm water running over my hands and steaming lightly against the cool air. By the time I set it on the drying rack, the last pieces of tension had dissolved into the morning. Distance has a way of softening the contours of what once felt sharp. I breathed evenly, my shoulders settling without effort. The scent of dish soap lingered as I wiped the counter, its clean, citrus trace mixing with the faint warmth of the early sun. I folded the dish towel, smoothing the edges until they aligned. The room looked untouched, almost new, like a reset rather than an aftermath. There was no echo of conflict here, no residue of argument, just a space shaped by intention and held by quiet. I carried the folded towel to the closet and placed it on the shelf, my hand steady. Some mornings redefine themselves the moment they begin. I unplugged the iron, coiled the cord, and tucked it into the small storage basket beneath the counter. The simple act felt grounding, practical, almost ceremonial in its own unassuming way. When I pushed the basket back into place, the soft scrape of wicker against wood sounded like the room settling into a new rhythm. I took a slow breath, feeling it fill my chest without resistance. This wasn't victory. It wasn't sorrow. It was ease. Quiet, honest ease. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. Today feels light. The pen glided smoothly across the page, leaving ink that dried quickly under the slant of morning sun. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on top of it for a moment, letting the stillness anchor me. No rush, no wait. Just a day beginning without expectation. I stood, walked toward the window, and allowed the soft warmth to touch my face. The air felt open, steady, unburdened. So did I. The studio felt different the morning after, lighter, in a way that didn't announce itself but settled quietly along the edges of the room. I opened the blinds, letting sunlight spill in with an almost deliberate slowness. The rug, the table, the single chair, all the ordinary objects seemed to settle into clearer shapes under the brightness. I stood in the center of the room, my toes curling slightly against the cool floor. Nothing had changed physically, but something had shifted, unmistakably, internally. The silence wasn't shared anymore. It was mine. I brewed tea, watching the small swirl of steam rise and drift toward the ceiling. The mug warmed my hands as I cupped it, the ceramic radiating steady heat. No footsteps approached the kitchen. No quiet tension lingered in the doorway. Just the simple sound of liquid settling as I placed the cup on the counter. I leaned into the stillness, letting it fill the cracks that noise used to occupy. Some mornings don't need meaning. They just need space. After breakfast, I opened the window to let the air move through the room. A soft breeze slipped past my shoulder, lifting the curtain in a slow, weightless arc. Outside, someone's dog barked faintly, the sound drifting up like a reminder that life goes on whether we stand still or not. I rested my elbows on the sill and let the air cool my skin. There was no lingering ache, no sharp thought, no replay of old conversations. Only clarity, steady and uncluttered. Sometimes peace arrives without ceremony. I took out the small notebook I'd been keeping since the day I moved in. Its cover was worn now, softened by the weeks I'd carried it everywhere. On a fresh page, I wrote a single line. I have room again. The ink settled into the paper, drying cleanly. I closed the notebook and set it aside, feeling the truth of the sentence settle deeper than the act of writing it. Space, literal and emotional, has its own gravity, and it felt good to stand inside it. Later, I folded fresh laundry, each piece smoothed into careful lines. The rhythm felt grounding, almost meditative. A shirt, a towel, a pair of socks. Every fold carried a sense of ownership, not of things, but of the life I was creating around them. No one interrupted, no one hovered, no one questioned the quiet choices shaping my day. I placed the final folded piece on the shelf, my hand steady and unhurried. Small tasks, done with intention, often mark the biggest turning points. As evening settled, I turned off the overhead light and let the soft glow of the lamp fill the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the calm that had slowly, steadily rebuilt itself. This wasn't the ending of a chapter. It was the start of a different kind of life, one shaped not by reaction, but by intention. I lay back, letting the quiet hold me. Nothing pulled at me from behind, nothing rushed me forward. I was here, present, unburdened. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. In the end, nothing dramatic marked the moment my life shifted. No grand gesture, no final confrontation, no door slamming behind him. Just a studio washed in soft evening light, and a kind of stillness that finally felt like mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint hum of the building settling around me, and realized that peace doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, the way dawn gathers before anyone notices. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't trying to rewrite what had already run its course. I was simply choosing myself, cleanly, without hesitation, without noise. The room held its breath with me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the shape of a future that didn't hurt to imagine. Not perfect, not polished, just honest, just mine. If this story touched you or reminded you of a moment when you had to reclaim your own space, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your experience. And if you want more stories told in this quiet, cinematic way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next one.